Welcome to The Flux, where we hear stories from people who've asked what-if questions to better understand the world and talk about how data can help tell stories that impact decisions and create an intentional impact on the future. This is your host, John Cordier, CEO at Epistemics. In a world where the flux capacitor from Back to the Future does not yet exist, people have to make difficult decisions without always knowing how the future will play out. Our guests are people who've taken risks, made decisions when uncertainty was high, and who have assisted decision makers by using data and models. We hope you can turn lessons from our podcast into foresight so you or your organization can make better decisions and create an intentional impact for others. All right, welcome to The Flux, where we get to hear stories from people who have asked the what-if questions to better understand the world and learn how data can help tell stories that impact decisions to create an intentional impact on the future. This is your host, John Cordier. Today, we're on with Doyne Farmer. Doyne, an American complex systems scientist and entrepreneur, has pioneered many fields that define the scientific agenda of our times. Things like chaos theory, complex systems, artificial life, even some early wearable computing. Currently, Doyne is Director of Complexity Economics at the Institute for New Economic Thinking at Oxford, and the Chief Scientist and one of the co-founders at Macrocosm. Doyne, welcome to The Flux. Glad to have you on.
Thank you. Very nice to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So you came out with a book earlier this year on the back of a couple decades worth of thinking about this stuff. I'm just going to read a part of the inside flap so that some of the listeners have some context as to where you're coming from. So the section I'm calling out here goes as follows. Using big data and even more powerful computers, we can, for the first time, apply complex system science to economic activity, building realistic models of the global economy. The resulting simulations and the emergent behavior we observe form the cornerstone of complexity economics. This new science will allow us to test ideas and make significantly better economic predictions and ultimately create a better world. So Doyne, maybe if you want to give a little bit of background into how you kind of landed on complexity economics and kind of how you came up with the term out of a lot of the agent-based modeling work that you've done in the past.
How did I personally end up doing complexity economics?
Yeah.
Well, like most things, purely by chance, I would say. I've always been interested in complex systems. That's, I don't think, by chance. I've been interested in that since I was in high school, and but I was also always been interested in doing something entrepreneurial, and not just being go around the wheel 50 times and then die academician. And so I had my childhood friend Norman Packard and I ran one of the early quantitative trading firms, prediction company. And during that time, I learned a lot about finance and started reading the literature and felt like the basic ideas were wrong. And so when I quit after 8 years, which was plenty of time for me doing that, I had a debate about what to do with my life. And I was torn between systems biology and applying complex systems to economics and finance. And I chose the latter route, which so the rest is just followed from there.
Yeah. So kindred spirit in, the belief that a lot of things, when they're not looked at from a complex system or bottom up type of view, you're going to get not only bad predictions, but also your understanding in that subject area is going to be a little bit less. So, our work started in public health. You took the approach in economics. What were some of the macro or micro economic principles that you're just like, this just doesn't make sense to keep doing it this way? What were some of the things that kind of took you off?
When I first started back in the 90s, I was reading the finance literature, And at the time, the dominant paradigm was efficient markets. So what we were doing, if efficient markets was right, then what we were doing had to be a scam. So, and we showed that was not true. We actually set out to disprove the efficient markets theory, and I think we did so resoundingly successfully, as did others during that same period. But the theories at the time would all either assume markets were perfectly efficient, or they would assume that everybody knew the correct valuation of things, which just seemed to me nobody knew the correct valuation of financial assets. And in fact, the fact that there were wide disagreements is why we trade so much. And so that was the first thing I put my finger on that, excuse me, that had to be wrong. Secondly, I just started thinking about, well, what's really going on in markets? How do people do things? And I realized that ecology was a better metaphor for what was happening, because financial markets are full of people who formulate specialized trading strategies. The activity of those trading strategies interacts with each other. And so each strategy is doing things that may generate returns for other strategies. And so I came up with a theory I called market ecology that really treated the market as an ecosystem, and an ecosystem of specialized players who interact with each other through the market. And that was not a theory that was very widely viewed with great enthusiasm by the mainstream, because they thought markets are efficient and we need theories that assume equilibria and that everything's priced fairly, and a lot of assumptions that just, to my mind, didn't match with reality. And we're certainly not what we were seeing, because we were making our living off of the deviations from those things.
So maybe for some of the listeners, they might be tuning in for the first time. Could you kind of talk a little bit about interactions, whether these are interactions of agents or firms? Could you provide a little bit more context for folks who might be listening to this podcast for the first time?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So in the context I'm talking about here, the agents would be investment firms or traders more generally. And the interactions are that if I buy an asset in the market, I move the price of that asset. If I'm buying, I push it up. If I'm selling, I push it down. And so when what prices do in markets is the cumulative result of all of the trades that everybody's doing. And so those interactions are affecting everything every participant does affects all the other participants. It's not like there is some ceiling, and if you trade below that ceiling, you don't make anything happen. And above that, everybody affects things. And actually, one of the things we now understand from all the theory we did since the 90s is that market impact is itself a very nonlinear function. And actually, the little guys have disproportionately high impact, which is surprising. So, and you can feel this in markets. When we were trading, one of our close competitors, D.E. Shaw, they had to unplug their trading system for 9 months. The slope of our P&L doubled during that period, and it went back to its previous slope when they switched back on. So obviously, we were each affecting each other by being there because we were competing.
Sure.
But other activity was acting as a food source for both of us. The kind of strategy we were trading, I think, feeds off of portfolio balancing. And so because people are balancing their portfolios, there were signals we could play that took advantage of the market moves that happen as a result of that.
Okay. So, you were in the finance area. Where else does this same type of collective behavior of a system get overlooked. If you looked at like the
Oh,
economic side, we look at it from
yeah.
the public health side. Yeah. But what's your take on where is this type of theory underutilized, but you see it being very important as the world's changing more and more going forward?
Well, I think economics and finance are the biggest examples just because the whole discipline has strongly resisted that approach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's maybe easier to start by naming areas where it has been utilized, and then we can maybe discuss the ones in the middle.
Sure.
Um, uh, there's been a lot of utilization, for example, for modeling traffic. In epidemiology, agent-based models have become the standard. Battlefield simulation, it's become standard. Um, there's a sense in which video games are almost agent-based models. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's hugely used. I mean, that's huge. Somebody recently said that more software has been written for video games than any other application. And that the biggest programs that exist are all for video games. Anyway, that's an interesting reflection on humanity. Um, uh, uh, then I think most of the rest of social science sits somewhere in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are some agent-based models in political science, but it's not the main focus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, there are some agent-based models in anthropology that I think people feel have been pretty useful. Anthropologists have been fairly open to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, it's not clear how useful it is in psychology. Not, because psychology is more about individuals in general. But in sociology, it's another area where it has been used, but probably not as much as it could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you had to kind of reflect, what makes agent-based modeling get adopted in some areas but not in others? Is it a use case? Is it data sets? Is it the challenge to build models? Like what do you think holds
Yeah.
areas back where others are, more apt to adopt?
So I think it's a mixture of things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the good reason why it's been slower to adopt in some areas, like economics, is that the utility of agent-based modeling becomes clearer when there's a lot of structural interactions, but when the behavior component is relatively simple and easy to understand. So, say in traffic, what behaviors do you have to understand to model traffic? Well, you have to know that people have the finite reflex time, and but otherwise, people follow pretty simple algorithms for
Mm-hmm.
driving in traffic, and for most of the applications, you don't have to worry about where Google Maps is sending them so much as why do you have traffic jams? How would things change if a new lane were added to this freeway or something like that? So that's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of questions they're addressing. You don't have to have really sophisticated behavioral models. Um, and so you can implement it, you can immediately see that it works, and it's all great. Epidemiology is a little bit in the middle. Some of epidemiological behavior is fairly straightforward. The way diseases get transmitted is reasonably straightforward if you understand the disease. There were problems with COVID because we didn't understand the disease at first. Um, but then, the more difficult problems become as people start to get afraid, or, they start to get more cautious as they learn. They see somebody die, they become more cautious. They stop doing the things they were doing before. That becomes harder to model. People have
Mm-hmm.
thought about how to model that. Josh Epstein, for example, has some models for dealing with that with Agent Zero. But um, but again, the part that's immediately useful is the more mechanical, straightforward part, and then it becomes more challenging as you have to model the other parts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, my own view is in economics, the decision making part is probably not as hard as people think. It's more getting a good model of the economy and how the economy as a system works putting all the accounting you need to have in place to be able to model a real economy and tracking all the things you need to track. But the jury's out. We're working on that as we speak.
Right. So if you look at kind of the structural components of the economy, you have individual consumers, you have the firms, you have people like putting influence or pressure on firms or regulation. What are some of the structural things that, in the near term, you think you and your team are going to be able to get good representations of to then start analyzing where do these small behavior shifts lead to economic shocks?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're trying to understand. Let me sort of parse that question out in different ways. So one question is, what questions are we going to try to answer? We're going to try and be able to make better conditional predictions of what the economy will do, subject to policy choices. So that's our central goal. So we also hope to be able to advise individual firms. What is a good strategy for you to follow? How would your business be affected if there's a policy change? What's likely to happen to you in view of what your competition is doing? By simulating not just firms typically plan by sort of making generic assumptions about what their competition is going to do and saying, we're going to do this. And that part they understand. What the competition is going to do is not as obvious. It's not going to be obvious for us either, but since we're simulating everybody, we're simulating both any given firm and their competition, then we can really think about the whole strategy space and what is the collective behavior of their competition likely to be. So we think that'll be really useful to people. We can also look at things like environmental side effects, like carbon emissions, or even other broader issues about sustainability, so that people can understand those better too. And we think that's really important. So we hope to do that well, and we hope to help people understand how to regulate an economy so that we can have prosperity while minimizing all the harmful side effects, which ultimately will oppose our prosperity.
Sure.
Okay. So that's what we're trying to do. You asked the question in a little bit of a different way, and I'm trying to remember how you asked it so I can answer it more directly.
So some of the data or the structure to get to that future where we are able to have I look at some of the framing around a guy named Raj Chetty and some of his work called the Opportunity Atlas, where he's really trying to solve issues of upward social mobility and prosperity, and looking at things like the Gini coefficient and some other things from a social standpoint. A lot of what's been done in that world already is more just descriptive about the past, rather than trying to understand what are the structures and how are they connected. So when building up to being able to understand the economy and impact of strategies, like what are some of the components that you and the team are working at building up to?
Yeah. Well, a good question. And that, traditional economic models need to stay pretty simple, at least if they're causal models that are trying to understand if we do this, how will that happen? What will happen? And that's the reason that's true is because traditional economic models are optimization models where you really actually try to compute the optimal decisions for all the agents to make. And in a nonlinear environment, that becomes very difficult when you have more than a handful of agents. And so that really limits what you can put in economic models. There's a big focus, for example, to connect to what you were just saying about Raj Chetty, there's a big focus in modern macroeconomics of trying to understand inequality. But to do that, they make these things called HANK models, heterogeneous agent neo-Keynesian models, where they still have to make very stylized assumptions. They can't deal with the multidimensionality of the populace they, will have some indicator of earning power, and they'll assume there's some Gaussian distribution of that indicator, and then their model can work on that to tell them what's happening. Whereas in our agent-based models, we can have synthetic populations, something I know that you're very familiar with, and I suspect your other listeners are familiar with. But we have synthetic populations where we can look at age, education, gender, race, geography, whatever you want to put in there. And we can look at what happens to all these different people. So we can really try and understand what's causing inequality. We could test hypotheses that Raj Chetty might get from the data analysis he's made. And that's certainly one of our goals, is to really better understand inequality. What are the drivers of inequality? What are policies that we can do that can help decrease it? And what are the real trade-offs? One of my hypotheses is that sometimes the economic growth is investor limited, and sometimes it's demand limited. And one of those tends to be the bottleneck, meaning that you have plenty of it, and it's really the other thing that's gating what can happen. And my belief, and it's just a hypothesis, I could be wrong on this, but for most of the last 15 or 20 years, the economy's been demand limited, meaning that why the economy isn't booming more is because, middle class and poor people don't have as much money to spend. And so there's not as much money for not as many things that companies can sell to them. Too many rich people, when rich people get money, they can't spend most of their money. So they have to either put it under their pillow or they invest it in something. And so if you have lots of rich people, you have an excess of investment capital, but the investments are not going to pay off as well because there's not people you can sell the stuff you want to build to, right? And so we'd like to understand that better. Where is the sweet spot? How do we set things so that we're operating at the point where we've got the right balance? And where my hypothesis is that, people traditionally, the trickle down economics people say, oh, well, we have to make a choice between economic growth and redistribution. So we have to live with inequality because it's good for everybody to have more investment. But if I'm right and we're actually often demand limited, then it's good for both. It's good for everybody to redistribute wealth appropriately. And but that's part of what we're trying to show, and we want to really try and understand that in a quantitative way, not just some vague, there's some point in the middle, but this is where we are right now, and this is where we need to go to make the system work better.
Yeah, we've seen some things like universal basic income or things related to retirement savings, and to your point on if there's existing inequality, we've seen in these models with very simple rules. Even if you say everybody in the population gets $1,000, you can spend it how you want to, you end up seeing this like concentration of where that wealth ends up going to like 50% is still in a top 10% sort of way. And then you get this kind of donut effect where but everyone started with the same thing. How do you still end up with this unequal distribution of where that money's spent? Do you want to call out any other people who are also championing this type of thinking or working on this type of question?
Well, I mean, there are groups of complexity economists around the world who have been working on these things for some time. Giovanni Dozzi has a very active group in Pisa. Herbert Dowd has a significant group in Bielefeld, Germany. And they've been thinking hard about these questions, trying to do them. Rob Axtell has a computational social science group in Washington at George Mason University. And then there's Shevin Turner's group, Complexity Science Hub in Vienna. So those are some of the centers of this kind work. Jean-Philippe Bouchot's group in Paris.
So if you had to, provide, a recommendation to any of these groups or people that also want to kind of get behind this idea, what is it going to take for this to go from a small group of people really looking into it to this is the way of the future. This is how we have to start looking at the economy and trying to understand it. What's going to be that inflection point?
I think the inflection point comes when we beat standard economic models in a very clear way on problems that are acknowledged to be important problems. And I think we haven't really done that yet, but I think we're about to start doing that more. And we have a few little proofs of principle, but you can still quibble about them. But like if we can just beat the mainstream at macroeconomic prediction broadly, then boom, the whole thing takes off.
Okay. In other fields of modeling, or even the emergence of more buzzwordy things like ML over the last 20 years or so, can you recall an inflection point in other areas where agent-based modeling was applied?
Well, yeah. There was such an inflection point in epidemiology when actually Dick Cheney, of all people, was very concerned about an anthrax epidemic, and that we had very limited vaccines. How should we use them? It would be costly to vaccinate everybody, but maybe we should think about doing that. And so there was actually a big push. A lot of government money became available for epidemiological modelers to try and understand these questions. And that provided a push so that at the end of those programs, we had, or that program, I can't remember what it was called now, we had much better epidemiological ABMs than we did before. And that became the standard state-of-the-art tool. So that was an example where a push was made by a policymaker and it happened. We haven't seen anything like that in economics, but we're trying to do commercial things that we think we can show are valuable that will also provide the funding to help us develop the agenda more broadly. It's a chicken egg problem. And so we're trying to help the chickens hatch some more eggs.
Absolutely. So I know one of those areas is energy. You want to talk about how you're thinking about energy and the sort of models that you're trying to, like an energy transition side? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's a topic I'd like to talk about because it's something where I'm pretty confident we're going to be successful. So we're building a model for energy investment. So the question is, if you take a firm that produces energy, it could be oil, gas, electricity, what will that firm, and how much will those firms invest, and what will they invest in, and how does that affect the system as a whole? So we're simulating the whole energy generation system. Well, we hope by mid-year to be doing the whole globe. Right now we're doing electricity in Canada, oil, gas in the US and Canada, and oil globally, but we'll soon be doing the whole thing globally. And so we're simulating at 1-to-1 scale, every firm, every asset of every firm. There's 30,000 firms in the database, 150,000 assets. But the reason I'm pretty confident this is going to work well is that we really have the micro data we need to micro calibrate and validate our model. Because, we have 100,000 assets that we can, so there's a lot of decisions we can test on and calibrate our model against. And because we have the whole picture, we really are closing the system. We can really see all the competition taking place. As I said, if you're thinking about any given firm that we could advise, we're simulating their competition so they can see
Mm-hmm.
Could they do better by doing something differently? So we can test that historically. Could they have done something better in the past? And then we can run it forward to see where they're likely to hit pitfalls. I mean, my fantasy, frankly, is to be able to advise companies like ExxonMobil saying, well, yeah, here, look, we capture your strategy here pretty well. We think you could have done better if you'd done this instead. And by the way, if you don't change your ways, you're going to go bankrupt about 2032 because the green revolution is going to overrun you at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's my fantasy. That's a hypothesis. Maybe when we analyze them, that scenario won't be the right scenario. I don't mean to say I know the answer to them yet. That's just the kind of thing that's motivating me to work on this, because I think that most private firms have not realized how quickly the energy transition is going to happen. And so if we can make them more aware of that and make them aware that it's in their commercial interest to understand that and act on that, then we will have helped the energy transition happen, and we can make it happen even faster than it would have happened otherwise. And happen more smoothly too. That's a key point. We don't want, it's not good for anybody if we have a really rocky energy transition. We want to do it quickly but smoothly.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I can draw a couple parallels to, let's keep picking on ExxonMobil for a moment. There's all the other players in the market, and when you're able to give them a view of here's the whole system, and they come back to you and say, well, this is what our data says, and this is what we rely on, and it's our data, and it's our data, and it's our data, and they don't take the view of the whole system. How have you gotten companies in the past or policymakers in the past to start viewing themselves as part of a greater whole and not just this is our data and this is absolute truth, compared to there's these other things that are also working on the system?
Yeah. I don't know if I have an easy answer for that. It's mostly just helping make them realize that. I mean, a lot of people realize that they're part of a bigger system. They just don't have any quantitative tools to help them think about who are they in that system and what's going on. One of the focuses I like to make in our models is that people can see themselves in the model. Yep. It's not some model of other stuff. It's, oh, there I am. Oh, and look at what's happening to me as time evolves.
Right.
Yeah. That gets their attention.
People are selfish, sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. But, and there are certainly plenty of policymakers who know that it's a big system. They're just, what they can do is just part of the system, but a lot of frustration that they don't know how to model. They don't know how to model that, how to take advantage of that, how to use that to make better decisions.
So one of the people you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, Josh Epstein, Josh sometimes advocates for the approach of, well, the hell with the data, just build the model in the way that, you understand it or you think the system's composed. Others take the approach of, well, here's the data, now we can get to a really good computational model of it. I'm not biased towards one or the other. I think both are important. When working in like the commercial space, do you find it easier for people to say, oh, well, here's your data, we can get you a good agent-based model? Is that normally what leads to easier adoption?
Yeah, I don't think I have a lot of experience with that yet, but let me just say, from my point of view, I'm in the camp of build the model, look at the data first, and build a model that takes advantage of that data, that's informed by that data, and because you'll build the model differently if you think about that from the beginning, and I think that's something new in agent-based modeling, where we're really building quantitative models that really do take advantage of big data sets. I mean, big data is one of the new things we have, so it's an opportunity. It's part of why I think the time is right for doing that approach. Now, oftentimes, people's own data is not sufficient to really model everything you want to model. And In the energy space, we're lucky that some commercial data providers have just been collecting the data we needed, so we could just buy it from them and build the models. We don't usually have that luxury.
So, a couple of converging factors would be access to data today, lots more computing today. People like Rob Axtell having 50 grad students doing agent-based modeling. What else are some of the things that could get more people into the model building, or what friction do you think has been there, even for the modelers themselves and the challenges that they've had to go through?
Yeah. Well, let me answer that in a few different ways. I think, there's a great opportunity right now because agent-based modeling has not realized its potential. And we finally have lots of computer power, lots of big data. We know a lot more about how to build agent-based models, though it's by no means a rote procedure. So the time is right. I think the success of machine learning helps us because people see, oh, models can be useful. But machine learning isn't going to solve all problems. Machine learning works great when you have a shitload of data and when you want to build a model that just predicts what's going to happen in the world. It doesn't work as well when you don't have so much data and when you want to model counterfactual things that machine learning algorithm hasn't experienced. And so that's what we can do with agent-based modeling. Because in agent-based model, you put in by hand the structure of the system. It's like a machine learning model with really, really strong priors. And that means you can get by with less data. The second thing is because you build the causal mechanisms in by hand, you can see whether you have the right theory about what's happening. And you have a much better shot at producing useful counterfactual predictions if you want to model the world as it might be. And whereas that's typically hard to do with machine learning models per se. So I think that's another reason why this is coming into play now. And as people build out all the applications of machine learning, the holes will become more conspicuous. Right. And agent-based modeling will fill a lot of those holes.
Right. So this notion of in a low data environment, that's a great opportunity to apply agent-based modeling. There's also the transparency aspect that you get with agent-based modeling that you don't in machine learning or using other techniques.
Yeah. And we're going to also see agent-based models that have machine learning within them. The agents may be doing machine learning. Certainly, we're already using machine learning to make sense out of different data sets and connect them together. If you want to connect 401ks with patent filings, you can use machine learning to connect to see which patents are going to be useful for which companies. Right. So we do a lot of that kind of thing to sort of make sense out of the space using machine learning as well.
So a lot of the people that we've talked about making use of agent-based modeling have been pretty big institutions. We picked on Exxon a little bit. You mentioned some policymakers. So like governments, big companies. Do you ever see a world where agent-based modeling becomes something of the everyday person for them to ask questions and contribute to policy?
Yeah, I hope that someday we'll have open source agent-based models that people can query to get answers to basic questions. And I think over time that will happen. Our company, at Macrocosm, we spend a lot of time wrestling about how much to open source and how much to hold back as a premium version. We do need to make money, but we do want to put a lot of stuff out open source too.
Yeah, we go through the same thing on the epistemic side. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, so probably have time for a couple more questions for the podcast listeners today. Um, One of my favorite questions to ask people is what was a what the flux type moment. So if you could rewind the clock, go back into the Back to the Future flux capacitor, uh, go in the past and say, you know what, if we only ran some simulations to test these counterfactual scenarios and made a different choice that led to a different trajectory for the world or for a certain population of people. Um, what would be one of those moments in time that you wish you could go back to run some simulations to say, this was an important inflection point. Here's something we could have done differently.
Well, just picking one of several possibilities, the financial crisis of 2008
Mm-hmm.
had some permanent effects, in part because it happened at all. So it caused a lot of unemployment and pain globally.
Mm-hmm.
But also because of the way we dealt with it. We dealt with it by bailing out the banks. A lot of people think we should have bailed out the households instead and let the banks, that would have helped the banks too.
Mm-hmm.
If we'd been able to simulate those two plans and show how they would have worked, maybe we could have bailed out the households. And why would that matter? Well, I think, a lot of people who were voting for Donald Trump did so because they felt like the Democrats didn't look out for them. You know, it was
Mm-hmm.
Obama's watch where we did the bailout. And uh, maybe if the households had been bailed out, we'd be in a different political situation right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and plus, I think the economy might have actually recovered more robustly. But
That's a
yeah,
really interesting point. A lot of the models that we get into, we kind of see one of a three-pronged thing that's getting optimized for. A lot of times it's the health of a population or some utilitarian benefit. It could be monetary or some economic version, or it could be votes, the favor that somebody might have for this product or this person or what it might be. Um, Between those three, is that kind of the triad that you see, or are there other things that you feel like when people are modeling, they're really trying to get at something else, or are those three things what most models are
so your
to?
three things are, again, they're like health and well-being of individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what were the other two now?
Some economic advantage for a
Economic
company,
advantage.
or
Yeah.
votes.
Or
Yeah.
votes. Yeah. I think, those are the three probably biggest motivations. Um, we're working on the first two. We're not doing anything political at macrocosm,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, we think that if you fix the first two, then some of the other things would become easier to pull along. Certainly, a lot of the dissatisfaction is about economic well-being
Mm-hmm.
and and inequality in that, unfairness. And so, we would like to be able to advise the world, meaning policymakers and private companies, so that they can both make better profits and be more sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and maybe if we're just smarter about what we do, smarter about our investments,
Mm-hmm.
we can do better. I'm quite convinced of that. You look at an area like technology investments. We've made some smart investments and we made some dumb investments, and we continue to make dumb investments in things that are not really going to pay off as well. And if we redirect those things, I think the whole world will be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I share the issues of inequality. What I'm inspired by your work is there's always a tie back to sustainability, and
Yeah.
what's better for the whole is likely better for all parts of it. So, in a closing kind of comment to listeners, whether they're policymakers, folks at companies, students, um, you know, I'll kind of leave it to you to kind of give a talk on, sustainability and why that's such an important thing and why it should be a major focus of the modeling that we're doing today, whether that's at macrocosm epistemics or anybody else doing it out there.
Yeah, well, I think it's just clear in the long run, things have to be sustainable. They will, one way or another, become sustainable, but we can get there by going through a dark period in advance, suffering a lot of pain in order to understand that we need to pay attention to those things. Or we can get there by navigating the economy sensibly so we don't have to learn the hard way. I'm worried we're going to have to learn the hard way. But even as we begin to learn the hard way, I want to have the tools built so that we can just say, good. This is the path that will get us to where we need to go with the least pain. As soon as possible with the least pain, because we'll get to a sustainable world that really, is healthy for the biosphere and healthy for people too.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to conclude. I want to thank you again for spending the time to jump on the podcast. We'll be talking to Dan coming up from Macrocosm. He'll be on the podcast later this week. We're going to release these 2 episodes together and hopefully can build some momentum for not only the work that your team's doing, but complexity economics and other people try to think about these big complex systems. I think whether it's in the name of sustainability or the name of improving inequality, I also share the belief the world can be a better place when these tools are out there. So, John, thank you for spending the time.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely.